The man Damien trusted for 3 years was the same man who helped kill his brother. Marcus Vale sat at Damien's table, ran his security, reviewed his brother's death, and pretended loyalty while feeding secrets to Silas Blackwood. Damien thought Evan died because a guard fell asleep. The truth was worse. Marcus had paid for that failure, covered it up, and waited years for them to destroy the Cross Empire from within. Let us step into the dark together, you and I. I want you to picture the scene. It is 6:12 in the morning, buried deep underground beneath the Cross Meridian Hotel. The security room breathes with the heavy, mechanical hum of cooling fans, casting 18 massive monitors in shifting shades of amber and blood red across the concrete. Then, the steel doors of the private elevator slide apart. Out steps Damien Cross. He wears a heavy black coat and leather gloves, still damp from a brutal drive out of Detroit. He moves with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a man who owns the very air in the room. Real power, you see, never has to shout to be noticed. It simply arrives, and suddenly everyone else forgets how to breathe. It reminds us that true authority is felt, not forced. Damien does not bother to glance at the warning screens, and he certainly does not ask what the flashing lights mean. Right in the center of the room, Savannah Rhodes is slumped over the main console. Her hand rests heavily on the keyboard, as if exhaustion struck her down in the middle of a thought. All 18 displays are in absolute chaos, blinking scarlet like a raging fire. No one is trying to extinguish. Beside her sits the quiet tragedy of an overworked technician. A freezing cup of coffee and a half-eaten granola bar. We push our minds and bodies to the breaking point for a paycheck, completely forgetting a very hard truth. The corporate machine will never love us back. And no matter what we sacrifice, it will never actually give us permission to rest. Standing right over the boss is Marcus Vale. He wears a sharp gray suit and gold-rimmed glasses, playing the slick, arrogant right-hand man you instinctively despise. He leans in close, whispering about how hiring an outsider was a massive mistake. Damien ignores the bait entirely. His eyes are dead cold, carrying the weight of a storm gathering for years. He orders a nervous guard to wake her up. Savannah claws her way out of a deep sleep, blinking against the harsh lights, completely disoriented before reality hits her. It is a very harsh truth about life. Our most vulnerable moments are almost always witnessed by the absolute worst possible people, leaving us completely exposed when we desperately need our armor the most. It takes 2 heavy seconds for her mind to reboot. Then she spots the dripping black coat and the dangerous man wearing it. This is the exact same boss who handed her a massive contract just 3 weeks ago. She chokes out his name, her throat dry, desperately trying to warn him about the network cluster. But Damien shuts her down instantly, barking at the guards to throw her out. Behind him, Marcus lets a cruel, satisfied smirk slide onto his face. He watches a single rogue data packet slip through the system to a sinister rhythm only he understands. We often think outside forces destroy an empire, but history shows us the truth. The most devastating betrayals are always an inside job, orchestrated by the very people standing closest to the throne. Savannah pushes herself up from the chair. Her legs are trembling, threatening to give out, but she firmly stands her ground. She does not beg to keep her job, and she refuses to offer excuses. She just stares directly into the eyes of Damien Cross, meeting his cold glare with quiet defiance. Neither realizes how much this fleeting moment of stubborn pride is about to cost them. On her way out, she stops by a terrified junior technician and whispers a strict warning not to restart the system. Immediately, Marcus swoops in, placing a heavy hand on the young man's shoulder. It is a sobering lesson about human nature. In this dark world, the people who act the most like your trusted protector are often the ones quietly tying the rope around your neck. "She is gone, kid," Marcus murmurs with a soft, entirely manufactured sympathy. Right now, her final warning means absolutely nothing to them. But stick with me here, because it is about to mean everything. In just a few hours, the hidden financial network of the syndicate will begin to collapse in ways no one can comprehend. Damien is about to learn that the woman he threw away was the only shield keeping his empire alive, but Savannah is accustomed to carrying heavy burdens in pure silence. That quiet weight she drags out. The door is a trauma she has held for 2 long years. We constantly make this tragic mistake. We blindly punish the exact people who are bleeding to save us, simply because we are too proud to see the quiet sacrifices they make in the shadows. Let us hit the rewind button for a moment and look at the bigger picture. Before this mafia madness, Savannah sat at a very different desk in the cybercrime division up in Chicago. She was a brilliant analyst, the kind of rare talent who spots the invisible threads everyone else overlooks. Her bosses were lining her up for a massive promotion. Then came a sunny April afternoon that shattered her reality. A careless driver ran a red light, and in a single heartbeat, her parents were gone. Her young sister Lily barely survived the wreck. Savannah walked away from her glittering career that very same day. It teaches us a profound lesson about loyalty. When the illusion of a normal life shatters, family is the only anchor left, and you drop absolutely everything to keep them safe. Listen closely. You and I both know the quiet sacrifices we make for the people we deeply love. Savannah took shady freelance security jobs just to be home early enough to care for Lily. The pay was terrible, but time was the only currency she desperately needed. When a mysterious broker offered a vague contract for a hotel network upgrade, Savannah only saw the massive paycheck. $180,000. That was exactly enough to cover her sister's physical therapy. She signed the papers completely blind. It was only on her first day, riding that private elevator underground, that she realized the truth. Desperation is a remarkably dangerous master. It forces genuinely good people to walk through incredibly dark doors just to keep their loved ones breathing. The syndicate boss, Damien Cross, was waiting for her on the 47th floor. He did not even bother to stand when she walked into the room. "You have 2 choices," he told her, his voice a terrifying low rumble. "Work for me and keep your mouth shut, or walk out right now and forget everything you saw." Savannah pictured her little sister struggling to walk, and she made the hard choice to stay. What she inherited was an absolute disaster of a network, a chaotic maze of fake companies, shuffling dirty money in the dark. Marcus Vale acted as her guide, smooth but carrying a ridiculously fragile ego. It is a fascinating aspect of survival. When your back is shoved completely against a brick wall, your personal pride vanishes, and you simply do whatever it takes to protect your blood. But Savannah was far from a rookie, and she watched Marcus closely. She noticed how he nervously rushed past specific sections of the network, waving his hands and offering incredibly vague answers whenever she asked for hard details. She kept her mouth shut and carefully filed every red flag away in her mind. Initially, she assumed a criminal operation would naturally hide its dirty secrets from the new hire. But Savannah was far too brilliant to fly blind. Purely out of habit, she quietly started mapping the dark corners of the system entirely on her own. It highlights a fundamental truth about human curiosity and trust. The harder someone desperately tries to steer you away from a locked door, the more you realize you absolutely must see the dangerous truth hiding behind it. Later that exact same night, Savannah sat on the kitchen floor with her little sister. Lily was lining up crayons, looking up with deeply serious eyes. She asked out of nowhere if Savannah worked for good people or bad people. Savannah pulled her close, deciding not to feed the child an empty lie. "I work to keep you safe," she said gently. Lily thought about it, then handed over a worn-out stuffed rabbit named Mr. Biscuit, whispering that he would watch out for her. Savannah hid that ragged toy deep inside her work bag. It is beautiful how pure love always finds a way to anchor us in the absolute worst storms. Over those insane weeks, that silly stuffed animal was the only genuine thing keeping her grounded in an underworld built entirely on violent lies. Flash forward to just 2 days before she finally collapsed at that underground control desk. Savannah noticed something deeply sinister, hiding in the raw data. A tiny cluster of rogue login requests was quietly slipping through the global queue. They were heavily disguised to look like normal traffic. But that was the fatal flaw. They were way too perfect. The timing was entirely rigid, the spacing perfectly exact. Real human beings make mistakes, they hesitate and stumble. This data had absolutely no soul. It carried the cold rhythm of a sniper watching you from the tree line. She pulled the logs, reading the code like a detective tracking a killer. Real danger rarely kicks down your front door. It usually just slips through a cracked window while everyone else is looking the wrong way. We are nearing the edge of the cliff now, you and I. The silence in this room's heavy with pending doom. These unseen digital phantoms were not aiming for a crude smash and grab. They were methodically mapping the labyrinth. Savannah traced the toxic code backward, finding its roots in a forgotten relay at the fringe of the syndicate network. It was the exact corridor Marcus had rushed her past during her first week. From that shadowed corner, the intruder was silently charting the architecture, waiting to strike. She slammed the terrifying evidence onto Marcus's desk. His eyes flicked over the logs, and instantly, his face hardened into a chilling, dead mask. Here is a truth you can carry with you. The most terrifying monsters in life rarely roar. They simply smile warmly while hiding the blade behind their back. The internal network is hemorrhaging, and Marcus, the supposedly fiercely loyal manager, coldly orders Savannah to stand down. The warm amber lighting of the office suddenly feels suffocating. He leans in, voice barely a whisper, insisting that Damien Cross absolutely despises false alarms. Just sit tight, he commands, his posture relaxed. But Savannah sees through the fog. Being told to sit still, while the firewall burns, is the ultimate warning sign. She offers Marcus a slow, obedient nod, playing the docile employee, to buy herself a few precious seconds. Always remember this vital lesson when the ship is violently taking on water. Never hand your only life jacket to someone else. While Marcus smugly turns his back, Savannah Cass' hands fly across her hidden keyboard, frantically coding a dark fortress just to save her own life. The syndicate servers resisted her, every agonizing step. She could not simply rip out the power cord, because hundreds of millions in dirty cash pulsed through those glowing cables every single week. Savannah had to keep the poison beast Munmerthangrid surgery on the infected code. It was exactly like trying to patch a violently sinking vessel in the dead center of a hurricane. For 36 grueling hours, she remained cooped in that freezing control room, sustained only by stale crackers and splashing freezing water onto her pale face. When she paused to call the neighbor watching her daughter, Lily, the exhaustion almost broke her. But remember, this true resilience is born in our most desperate moments. Leaning against the cold concrete wall, she choked back tears and promised her little girl she would be home very soon. When little Lily asked over the phone if her worn-out stuffed bear was helping, Savannah forced a strained laugh, swearing the toy was working the night shift. But late on that second night, just as the city lights began to fade, she uncovered something genuinely horrifying. Buried beneath the main directory was a dormant sleeper virus. It was a digital landmine, patiently waiting for an unsuspecting hand to hit the standard system restart. There is a deep truth hidden in these shadows. The absolute biggest disasters in life often hide perfectly inside our most mundane routines. If anyone triggered that reboot, every desperate wall she had bled to build would vaporize. The virtual vault would swing wide open, bleeding the Empire dry in under 7 minutes. Trembling, she began stuffing her frantic warnings into a heavily encrypted, hidden folder. She titled this desperate digital lifeline the Rhodes Handover, leaving a bold, glaring warning on the final screen. Do not restart. This is a deadly trap. Call me first. Her grand plan was to march straight into the penthouse at dawn and drop the damning evidence onto Damien Cross' immaculate desk. But at 5 a.m, her body simply gave out. Her head slumped against the cold keyboard, eyes closing for what was meant to be just 1 minute. You and I both know how one exhausted mistake can permanently alter the entire course of your life. Fast forward to 6:12, and Damien slowly steps off his private elevator. The man is a walking shadow, drifting past his crew like a king burdened by an ocean of regrets. He stalks into his dark office, shuts the heavy oak door, and immediately pours a tall glass of neat whiskey. Morning light crawls across the freezing lake, but Damien just stares at the gray waves, his expensive whiskey sitting entirely untouched. 3 years ago, the violent undertow of this syndicate drowned his younger brother, Evan. The boy was barely 24. Damien had pulled him into this suffocating underworld because he desperately needed one soul he could actually trust. Instead, he watched Evan bleed out on the filthy concrete of a warehouse during a brutal police raid. That haunting image constantly gnaws at his fading humanity. The raid only happened because a trusted guard fell asleep at the monitors, leaving the perimeter blind for 4 minutes. Always remember this crucial lesson. One tiny moment of dropping your guard can cost you everything you hold dear. Those 4 silent minutes were all the assault team needed to shatter Damien's entire world. By the time the syndicate muscle realized the perimeter was breached, tactical rounds were already shredding the drywall, and Evan was gone. In the suffocating aftermath, Marcus took control of the internal review. He handed Damien a beautifully sanitized report, swearing the young guard simply out from exhaustion. Damien desperately craved closure, so he swallowed the convenient lie. But the truth is always a much darker creature. Marcus had actively paid that guard to look away. And when that exact same man mysteriously drove his sedan off a steep bridge 2 weeks later, Marcus orchestrated that deafening silence too. Evan's death was never a tragic accident of fate. His blood was a calculated down payment. Marcus sold the boss's own flesh and blood to a rival faction just to climb the ladder. Unchecked ambition will always demand a human sacrifice. Damien remained entirely blind to the venom swimming in his own ranks. He genuinely believed a sleeping guard was the sole reason his beloved brother died. Standing rigidly in the pouring rain at the funeral, he forged a merciless new law. For 3 long years, anyone caught sleeping on the job was instantly banished. 0 exceptions, 0 mercy. It had stopped being about actual security a long time ago. It was a deeply personal memorial to his fallen brother. Now, standing in the cold light of his office, Damien grips his phone tightly. He desperately wants to call down to the tech floor and check on Savannah's frantic logs. But true leadership is an incredibly lonely island. If he shows even a fraction of mercy now, the wolves will smell blood. Sometimes, the strict rules we invent to protect our fragile grief end up trapping us in a silent prison. He slowly lowers the receiver, leaving the amber liquid untouched on his desk. Suddenly, Marcus struts into the room, bypassing the courtesy of a knock, and tosses a thick folder onto the polished mahogany. He boldly declares the servers are perfectly safe, now that Savannah is gone, bragging that he will personally oversee the digital floor. Damien stares deeply into the middle distance and quietly asks how fast they can replace her. Marcus smoothly promises 2 days. Damien offers a slow, heavy nod, but his instincts are violently screaming at him. He remembers the raw terror in Savannah's voice, and Marcus's overly polished narrative feels dangerously hollow. But here is a heavy truth to carry. Sometimes we actively ignore our sharpest instincts, simply to maintain the fragile illusion of control. Down in the server dungeon, a manager named Hutchins watches in pure horror. Every agonizing second risked millions in illicit funds. Hutchins begins to visibly sweat, frantically barking orders for a total system restart. The young rookie coder, Eli, freezes, stammering that Savannah had strictly commanded them never to touch that button. Hutchins aggressively snaps back, his voice echoing off the cold servers, shouting that she was fired and her warnings are meaningless garbage. Standing quietly in the shadowy doorway, Marcus watches his complex, deadly trap finally snap shut. A faint, cruel smirk plays on his lips as he plays the calm mentor. gently encouraging them to just follow standard protocol. With a trembling hand, Eli hits the fatal key. For 30 tense seconds, the network glows a soothing, healthy green. The room exhales. But let me tell you, a false sense of peace is always the quiet setup for an absolute, devastating disaster. Out in the fluorescent hallway, a guard was chuckling by the coffee machine. It was just a painfully ordinary moment, entirely blind to the approaching apocalypse. At exactly 12:51, the massive digital lock simply melted away. There was no theatrical explosion, no blaring sirens to warn them. The absolute worst disasters in our fragile lives are usually entirely silent, slipping casually through the back door when we are busy looking the other way. The giant central monitor casually blinked a minor error code. One frozen financial transfer. Then 4. Then 17. By 12:54, the magnificent digital fortress Savannah had sacrificed her own sanity to build violently collapsed. The delicate architecture snapped like dry winter timber. Every virtual door she had desperately deadbolted blew completely off its hinges. The ghost hackers walked right in. Stick with me, because this is where the massive web of deceit unravels. In a matter of minutes, $14 million literally evaporates into the cold ether. The cash is siphoned from the deepest reserves and scattered across untraceable accounts. Suddenly, the quiet server room erupts into a violent nightmare of shrieking alarms and blinding red lights. Hutchins is sweating profusely, frantically begging for Marcus. Right on cue, Marcus bursts through the doors, delivering a perfect performance of shock. He feigns pure panic, slamming his fists against the console, screaming for a manual reset, but the system violently rejects his commands. Here is the final lesson. Remember, the fires we intentionally set to burn others will eventually consume the ground we stand on, leaving us completely trapped in the ashes of our own making. Savannah poured the very marrow of her sanity into forging that digital fortress, only to watch a single arrogant keystroke incinerate it to ash. Red emergency strobes violently wash over the control room. In the harsh glare, young Eli physically shakes, his pale fingers opening a buried file. He reads her final warning, his voice cracking over the deafening sirens. Do not restart. This is a trap. Call me first. The noise seems to vanish, replaced by a suffocating, leaden silence. Every terrified eye slowly turns toward Hutchins, the man who arrogantly forced their hand. Desperate to mask his treachery, Marcus yells over the mounting dread. It is a tragic truth we all face. Blind arrogance always hides the edge of the cliff until the freefall has already begun. Marcus paces the floor like a caged animal, swearing he can stabilize the crashing servers without her. The bitter irony drips from every desperate step. He planted the poison himself, yet lacks the intellect to breach the firewall Savannah left behind. Exactly 10 minutes bleed away before Damian Cross steps through the doors, bringing the room down to freezing. He carries the slow gravity of an executioner. Hutchins chokes out the numbers, $14 million gone, bleeding $2 million every 60 seconds. Damian simply asks who can stop it. Young Eli stammers Savannah's name. Damian turns his unblinking stare directly onto Marcus. The traps we eagerly build for others are so often the exact cages we die inside. Let us pause and look at this scene together, just you and I. Marcus is drenched in cold sweat, begging his boss for a sliver of extra time. But Damian simply glides past the panic, his dark eyes scanning the flickering server logs. The tightening muscles in his jaw reveal everything. Savannah was not merely fixing an error. For 48 agonizing hours, she stood entirely alone in the dark, holding back a massive siege his own men never even saw coming. Damian lifts his phone and dials her number. 3 hollow rings echo, followed by dead air. Slipping into the shadows, Marcus frantically types a burner text to permanently erase her access. It is a quiet, brutal lesson. The loudest performers of loyalty are usually the ones holding a dagger to your spine. Retreating into the gloom, Marcus quietly initiates his backup contingency, a kill order sent straight to Silas Blackwood. Across the room, Damian abruptly breaks his silence, his voice cracking like a whip, as he orders his driver to find Savannah immediately. In a staggering display of desperation, Marcus physically steps into his path, trying to frame the girl as the mastermind. Damien does not even bother to look at him. He whispers that she is not the one they need to fear, leaving Marcus drowning in his own panic. Miles away, Savannah sits rigid in the back of a moving car. Her chest heaves, fighting for a breath. Sometimes life forces you into absolute ruin, solely so you can learn how to build your true strength from the ashes. Savannah crushes the phone to her ear, dialing Rebecca repeatedly, only to hear a hollow, automated voice. 5 agonizing minutes drag on before she stumbles into her obsessively organized apartment. It is a coping mechanism many of us know well. When your mind is fracturing, keeping your physical space pristine is the only way to hold back the madness. Crossing the threshold, her little sister Lily collides with her in a desperate hug. Nora, their gentle neighbor, takes one look at the hollow terror in Savannah's eyes and understands. She asks nothing. She leaves a bowl of hot soup and quietly slips out the door. True empathy is a rare thing. The greatest gift you can give a shattering soul is often just the quiet grace of a moment to breathe. Savannah steps under a freezing shower, needing the physical shock just to keep her mind anchored to the present. Utterly drained, she collapses onto the faded sofa, letting little Lily drape a heavy blanket over her trembling shoulders. Exactly 40 minutes of fragile peace pass before the sharp buzz of the doorbell shatters the silence. Savannah jolts upright. She presses her eye to the peephole, and her veins turn to ice. 2 towering figures eclipse the hallway light. The broader man stretches his lips into a practiced, soulless smile. He greets her with an artificial warmth that makes her stomach plummet. Always trust your primal instincts when a stranger's energy feels entirely hollow. Violence is already standing at your door. The man introduces himself as Victor, wearing the polished charm of a wealth manager. He smoothly mentions her sudden termination, painting her rare talents as a tragic waste. Savannah recognizes the rhythm of a predator, adrenaline surging. She slams her shoulder into the oak door. A heavy leather boot easily catches the frame. Victor leans in, offering $500,000 to cripple the network. She stammers about her confidentiality agreement, but he only laughs. Then the ultimate tragedy strikes. Sweet Lily calls out from the shadowed hallway. Victor's eyes snap toward the innocent sound, narrowing like a starved wolf. The moment you expose what you love to the darkness, you hand them the exact blade they need to cut your heart out. Driven by sheer terror, Savannah drops her weight against the door, sliding both deadbolts home with a harsh crack. She sweeps Lily into her arms, sprinting wildly toward the bathroom. This space is no longer just a washroom. Hidden within the frame is a reinforced steel core she installed after a crushing loss last year. It is a bitter poetry of the human condition. We only forge iron walls after our spirits are broken, desperate to never bleed that way twice. Beyond the door, the gentle knocking erupts into a furious, splintering assault. A muffled voice growls a new order. Savannah's breath catches in her throat as a terrible, metallic scratching echoes through the small apartment. The intruders are methodically picking the locks of her fragile sanctuary. In the pitch black of the steel-lined room, Savannah buries Lily's face in her chest. The child shakes like a leaf, bravely fighting back tears to whisper a soft question about her doll. But Savannah is paralyzed by a far more terrifying thought. Her encrypted laptop, the skeleton key to a billion-dollar empire, is resting exposed on the living room couch. Without warning, the apartment door violently detonates inward. 2 deafening gunshots vibrate through the floorboards, leaving behind a thick, suffocating quiet. The slow, rhythmic strike of leather shoes approaches the hallway. A deep, resonant voice speaks her name. Damien Cross. We pray for knights in shining armor, forgetting that true salvation sometimes wears a tailored suit, soaked in the blood of our enemies. Let us step into the aftermath together. The narrow hallway reeks intensely of sulfur, scorched wood, and fresh copper. Damien stands like a marble statue in the dim light, the heavy barrel of a suppressed pistol angled toward the floor. Two massive bodies lie completely still by the splintered doorway. His void-like eyes scan Savannah, then drift down to the trembling little girl, clutching her jeans. For one agonizing second, profound grief cracks the syndicate leader's porcelain mask before snapping back into pure ice. In a brutal world, our softest emotions are the very first things we must bury to survive. Savannah chokes out a question: is he only here for the money? Damien sharply orders them to move. The Sirens are already singing their grim song in the cold distance. Watch how the camera lingers on this exchange. Tiny Lily takes a brave step toward this shadow-drenched killer and lightly tugs at his sleeve. Staring up into his eyes, she asks the question every adult is too cowardly to speak. Are you a good person or a bad one? Damien Cross, a man who dictates life and death, is left paralyzed. The line dividing a righteous savior from a ruthless monster is only ever drawn by the person doing the surviving. Down in the rain-slicked alley, a black armored SUV growls in the mist. Anton, a scarred veteran loyal to Damien for 15 years, grips the steering wheel. Spotting the blood on his boss's cuffs, he simply nods. In the back seat, Savannah clutches her laptop as they vanish into the cold urban night. In the gloom of the speeding SUV, the adrenaline finally recedes. Savannah collapses against the door, her hands violently rattling against her knees. We forge ourselves into iron to survive the fire, only to shatter into pieces the exact second we feel safe. Gasping for air, she asks Damien the impossible question. Why risk his life to save her, right after throwing her to the wolves? Damien stares blankly at the wet pavement blurring past the window. His voice is tight, stripping away his ego to quietly admit she was right. Their bleeding money $14 million vanished into the ether. Savannah lets her eyelids fall, taking one slow, ragged breath. When she opens them, the terrified victim is entirely gone. Her hands are completely steady. The real war has just begun. Frame the shot tight on the vehicle's interior. Shadows bleed across the leather as Savannah violently snaps back to reality, demanding a secure terminal. Wedged between them is little Lily. The 6-year-old looks at the man drenched in crimson and simply asks if he is her sister's boss. Savannah mutters that he used to be. Ignoring the heavy scent of copper, the child zeroes in on Damien. Was he actually kind? The camera lingers on the syndicate boss. He has stared down assassins. Yet a child's demand for basic decency leaves him paralyzed. It forces a tragic realization. The most innocent questions are exactly the ones that expose our darkest moral failings. He swallows hard, whispering that he is trying, while Lily quietly judges his ruined soul. The camera drops to eye level with the child, who refuses to retreat a single inch. She holds the dead, terrifying gaze of the syndicate leader and plainly states that merely trying falls short. He has to actually do the right thing. It is a profound, aching reminder. Noble intentions mean absolutely nothing if your actions fail to support them. Savannah lets out a ragged breath, hovering between a laugh and a total collapse. Minutes later, they enter Damien's glass fortress, high above the neon glow of the city. Pacing the floor like a tiny detective, Lily inspects the cold architecture. She approves of the view, but firmly demands a genuine apology for her sister getting fired. Stripped of his untouchable armor, the crime lord bows his heavy, exhausted head and quietly concedes. You and I must appreciate the sheer weight of the silence in his private office. The only sound is the hum of the workstation. Damien slides across the desk. Savannah sinks into the chair, her pale hands moving with desperate precision. Within seconds, the digital footprints glow under the cold monitor light. A supervisor ordered the system restart, but the chilling detail is that Marcus Vale personally approved it. Vale allowed the breach. He is the traitor. But there is a crucial truth to remember here. Paranoia without solid proof is nothing but poison. Accusing a mafia lieutenant without undeniable evidence is an absolute death sentence. She swallows the rising dread in her throat, forces her shaking hands back to the keys, and remains perfectly silent in the dark. Savannah plays her hand perfectly. She refuses to name the traitor without hard proof. stating only that stopping the hack is the absolute priority. She leaves the boss with a chilling warning to trust no one. Damien nods grimly and steps out into the hallway. Standing near the guest room door, he watches little Lily whispering to a worn stuffed rabbit. Suddenly, a suffocating wave of grief crashes over him. The lighting dims as he remembers Luca, the terrified street kid who once stood shaking with a gun. The bitter tragedy is that he unknowingly watered a seed of vengeance with his own 2 hands. The lesson here is inescapable. You can never truly outrun your past mistakes. Your deepest sins simply wait in the dark, patiently plotting your downfall. For 3 agonizing hours, the tension in the room remains suffocating. Savannah operates in the dark, whispering sharp commands to the glowing screens. We all recognize that frantic state where throwing yourself into a desperate task is the only thing stopping a total breakdown. Without warning, Damien places a perfectly crafted espresso near her trembling hand. It is deeply unsettling. I mean, the man is still wearing a blood-stained jacket, yet he brews something so delicate. Unable to reconcile the brutal killer with this quiet caretaker, she simply drinks. Beside her, Damien begins constructing a hidden shadow network, handing her 3 names to trust. The takeaway is simple and harsh. Never place blind faith in strangers when your life is on the very edge of the blade. The camera pushes in as the final name appears on the screen: Eli Park. He is the only man who proved his absolute loyalty when the old syndicate crumbled to ash, and Savannah trusts him to anchor their defense. Her fingers fly across the keys with clinical precision. First, she traps the malicious outbound connections, knowing you never alert predators that they are being hunted. Next, she constructs a phantom pathway to trace the $14 million. She begins rewriting 23 security protocols. But right on the 17th lock, her hands freeze. A beautifully sophisticated trap is buried deep inside the code. She absorbs the shock in total silence. The wisdom here is clear when you uncover a hidden snare. Panic is your enemy. You must quietly observe how to disarm it. As Savannah isolates the digital back door, the glowing code reveals a devastating tragedy. The breach was an inside job, the most painful kind of betrayal. She quietly mirrors the data into a concealed file, delaying the horrific revelation of who planted it. Damien stands behind her, like a stone sentinel. He breaks his vigil only once, stepping into the shadows for a clandestine phone call in an untraceable murmur. The moment the massive hack is finally severed, Savannah collapses back into her leather chair. Exhaustion hits her like a physical blow, and she takes her first genuine breath. Damien smoothly slides a cold glass of water onto the desk. The lesson is, elegant sometimes the most profound way to support someone through a crisis is simply staying silent and providing exactly what they need. Stick with me, because the emotional temperature of the room suddenly drops. Damien asks the critical question, why did she run home instead of vanishing? Savannah stares right through him, her eyes deadened by trauma. She believed his enforcers were coming to silence her. This highlights a painful truth. Once trust is completely shattered, every shadow morphs into a deadly enemy. Damien does not erupt in anger, but swears he never would have ordered her execution. Savannah counters immediately, reminding him how ruthlessly he had just fired her. The crime lord sinks into his chair, crushing weight of his violent world visibly pressing down on his shoulders. Dropping his impenetrable armor, he begins to speak of his late brother Evan, a young man who only wanted to be an architect. The dim lighting catches the sorrow in Damien's eyes. His voice turns hollow as he describes a guard who fell asleep for just 4 minutes. That microscopic window allowed a rival faction to assassinate his brother. Standing at the funeral, Damien forged a draconian law: if you fail your post, you are exiled forever. The tragic pieces finally lock into place for Savannah. His earlier cruelty was not the hallmark of a cold monster, but the agonizing scar tissue of pure grief masking itself as discipline. It grounds him in humanity, though it does not absolve his sins. When she asks about their next move, Damien begs her to work for him permanently, but Savannah anchors herself to a core life lesson: Never compromise your family's safety for money. She flatly refuses to drag little Lily into the dark. Desperate, Damien outlines concessions to shield her from the syndicate's brutality. He proposes remote access, round-the-clock security, and pledges to bankroll a legitimate tech firm. Savannah lets his promises hang in the dead air. She glances at Lily, sleeping peacefully with her stuffed rabbit. Her ultimate decision has nothing to do with the allure of his wealth. It is driven purely by the visceral memory of assassins bleeding out on her living room floor. This forces an uncomfortable life lesson sometimes. You must align with a lesser evil, simply to survive the night. It is the cold mathematics of survival. Their mutual enemy, Blackwood, is a relentless predator. If Damien's empire crumbles, Blackwood will inevitably hunt Savannah and her little sister to the absolute ends of the earth. The crushing reality of the situation settles into the shadows. Savannah and Lily remain safe only as long as this crime lord stays breathing to hold back the wolves. Meeting his intense gaze, she agrees to stay, but her voice is forged from steel. She dictates her own terms. Grabbing a notepad, she writes 3 unyielding boundaries. First, Lily must remain ignorant of the underworld. To her, Damien is merely a boring hotel executive. Second, the violence stays strictly quarantined in the shadows. Third, she retains the power to walk away with 1 week of notice. This brings us to a crucial life lesson. Never enter a dangerous negotiation without establishing rock-solid boundaries first. The formidable syndicate boss merely stares at the paper, quietly absorbing her bold demands. The syndicate leader does not argue. Damien takes the pen and signs his name. You and I must appreciate the irony. A ruthless mass who was destroying enemies hours ago is now binding and sentenced to a contract like a common lawyer. He adds only 1 rule. If she senses a threat, she must report it instantly. 0 secrets. Looking into his eyes, Savannah sees a fractured man whose brother perished because someone stayed quiet. She agrees, reinforcing a critical life lesson. Keeping secrets in a crisis is the fastest way to get destroyed. Meanwhile, miles away in the freezing urban decay, the traitor Marcus Vale sits in a darkened vehicle. A horrifying phone call just delivered the grim reality. 2 of his shadow operatives are dead, and 1 is captured. The pieces are moving, and the board is finally set for war. Let the camera linger on the exact moment a predator realizes he is bleeding in a pool of sharks. When the whisper reaches Marcus that Savannah is secured within the syndicate, his facial muscles do not even twitch. He merely breathes out, wearing the terrifying marble stillness of a man watching his own executioner sharpen the axe. Savannah's mind is a labyrinth of digital brilliance, and she will inevitably unearth the shadows he buried. Clutching an untraceable phone in the dark, he begs his hidden architect for time to tear this empire down. 24 hours, that is all he gets. You and I know how this Greek tragedy ends, do we not? When you waltz upon the edge of a poisoned blade, the final toll is always your life. The encrypted line dies, abandoning Marcus to the suffocating, icy silence of his sedan. The air grows heavy with the scent of imminent betrayal. His thumb swipes a concealed screen, illuminating a solitary, pulsing beacon, a tracker he grafted to Damien's chassis 6 months ago. The architecture of his treason has been agonizingly patient. Knowing a frontal assault against a titan is suicide, Marcus slips through a forgotten digital vein into the luxury tower's central nervous system. He weaves malignant flaws into the feed, orchestrating a 10-second blackout. The camera must emphasize this brutal poetry. Catastrophe never arrives as a roaring earthquake. It begins with a silent, invisible fracture in the dark. Through the monitor's harsh glare, Marcus bleeds a quiet infection into the perimeter sensors, carving blind spots that will soon become corridors of slaughter. Cut to the 38th floor, bathed in the melancholic glow of the city. Lily slumbers heavily, her small hands strangling a stuffed rabbit. By the reinforced glass, Savannah stands entirely rigid. Damien steps into the frame, his towering silhouette pausing at a respectful distance. He notes she has been awake for 3 agonizing days. 4, she corrects, her voice a rusted blade. He offers a secure bedroom, but she sharply demands to know which of his soldiers can truly be trusted. The lighting dims as he confesses only one man is beyond doubt. True sanctuary is a heavy currency, bought only with blood. The camera tightens on the shifting tectonic plates of their power dynamic. Savannah keeps her spine straight, addressing him with the frigid formality of Mr. Cross. The underworld king steps forward, practically begging her to use his given name. Look closely at his eyes. This is a profound psychological fracture. She demands accountability from the devil who built her cage. Instead of breathing fire, the beast bows his head. He confesses that his own blind arrogance nearly reduced everything they cherished to white ash. Without a word of absolution, Savannah simply nods and walks away. The shot lingers on Damien, marooned in the suffocating shadows, watching a fragile child sleep. Even the most ruthless gods must eventually break before the fragile things they love. A terrifying realization sinks its claws deep into Damien's chest. For the first time since he washed his brother's blood from his hands, this sovereign of violence has found something to lose. In his brutal world, love is a fatal hemorrhage. For 3 relentless days, the lighting shifts from dawn to dusk as Savannah turns his spacious office into a digital fortress, hunting their enemies. Damien leaves before the sun rises, yet he constantly finds himself racing back hours before his dark duties are finished. He offers no apologies. Savannah simply pauses her typing, listening to the heavy, familiar rhythm of his boots, echoing on the hardwood. A profound cinematic truth unfolds. Home is never just a geographic coordinate. It is the steady heartbeat of a protector. The absurdity of this tragedy demands a wide shot. A little girl, who should be staining her fingers with bright paints, is being conditioned for the apocalypse. Savannah turns the heavy oak dining table into a covert survival academy. Between spelling words, she orchestrates a psychological drill. Lily innocently calls a game of looking. In the muted evening light, Damien leans against the marble counter, his hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, watching this surreal theater. Savannah asks the child what changed in the room, and Lily immediately points to a shifted floor lamp with the dead eyes of a veteran sniper. Damien's jaw clenches. The most agonizing casualties of war are the children who must slaughter their own innocence just to survive the night. The fundamental law of this penthouse is a suffocating paranoia. Once the child is tucked away in the dark, the unsaid friction violently ignites. Damien steps into Savannah's space, his voice a low rumble, accusing her of forging a little girl into a weapon of war. Savannah refuses to yield a single inch, her eyes flashing with tears she refuses to shed, stating that the world offers zero mercy to the blind. Knowing her shadowed history, Damien pushes back, and her meticulously crafted armor finally shatters. She chokes on the memory of the twisted metal and shattered glass that took her parents in a single roaring heartbeat. Stick with me here, because this is where the tragedy sings. Shared trauma forces 2 bleeding souls to invent a new language of survival in the dark. Damien does not offer empty platitudes. He merely sinks into the leather chair beside her, anchoring her in the storm. She rips open the darkest wound of all the memory of her brother's blood pooling on the asphalt because she was exactly 10 minutes too late to save him. The feared syndicate boss melts away, leaving only a scarred man sitting in silent reverence. Before the grief can swallow them whole, the soft padding of small feet breaks the tension. Lily emerges, holding out a crumpled sheet of paper like a holy relic. Sketched in violent, waxy crayon are 4 figures: a giant, a blonde woman, a small girl, and a rabbit. It is a cinematic masterpiece of emotion. When you are drowning in an ocean of blood, the purest, simplest love is the only rope thrown into the abyss. We must frame this profound juxtaposition perfectly. An oasis of pure innocence blossoming in the dead center of a mafia war room. 4 jaggedly drawn figures standing defiant against a cruel universe. Lily proudly declares this group an impenetrable fortress. The camera pushes in on Damien. He stares at the crude art, letting a heavy, agonizing silence stretch out. Savannah's breath catches, waiting for the cold rejection. Instead, the architect of 1,000 nightmares rises, swearing to frame this masterpiece right beside his command monitors. Savannah whispers that he does not need to play a role for the child. He turns, his dark eyes entirely stripped of deception, and confesses he means every word. You and I are watching a petrified heart shatter, letting the light pour in. The air between them vibrates with an agonizing fragility. Damien closes the distance, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper, asking a question that could destroy him. If his empire were reduced to smoking ash, could she ever look at him and just see a man? Savannah admits her terror, yet her eyes refuse to close the door. It is a devastatingly beautiful seed of hope, but in this violent ecosystem, hope is merely the prelude to the slaughter. At exactly 3 minutes past 1 in the morning, the illusion is ripped apart. A perimeter alarm shrieks. Anton vaults into the corridor, weapon drawn, but the hall is completely empty. Carved deeply into the cold marble wall is a violent letter, pinning a single white envelope. Whenever we dare to love, the wolves come for the throat. Anton rips the envelope from the wall, unearthing a promise of absolute terror penned in elegant, mocking strokes. By the time the sun bleeds over the horizon, the sanctuary has dissolved into a militarized bunker. Damien vibrates with a cold, terrifying wrath as his enforcers tear through the surveillance feeds. A ghost appears on the screen, a man in maintenance overalls, gliding through the camera blind spots with the grace of an assassin. But this is where the Greek tragedy demands its toll. When a man believes he is a god, he forgets to look at the dust. The phantom failed to account for a hidden pinhole lens nested inside a fire alarm. For one agonizing frame, his sharp profile is caught. The grandest empires always fall because of one single, arrogant drop of hubris. Let us lean in and examine the anatomy of this betrayal together. A single blurred frame is rarely enough to condemn a man to the grave, but Savannah is a creature of terrifying focus. When Damien roars for a name, she swallows the agonizing truth. Her trembling fingers scrub the footage backward, isolating a microscopic, rhythmic twitch in the phantom's left shoulder. It is an undeniable biological fingerprint. Yet, she locks her jaw. She knows the syndicate's wrath. If she offers a guess, Damien will burn down half the city, slaughtering the innocent while the true serpent slips away. Pushing aside her boiling rage, she feeds the footage into a classified military algorithm. The lesson resonates through the screen. True justice is the cold steel of absolute certainty, never blind fury. The clock ticks like a judge's gavel. Processing 200 syndicate files demands 24 hours. For Damien, waiting is a cage. He floods the perimeter with enforcers, sealing them in a suffocating vacuum of paranoia. Little Lily sits, swallowed by an oversized leather chair. She has not felt the sun in 7 days, and her hollow silence is devastating. Savannah steps into the harsh light, her voice cutting through the tension. When a child packs trauma into quiet boxes, you have to break the pattern before it breaks them. Defying his brutal survival instincts, Damien nods. He chooses a chaotic ice cream parlor on the pier, hiding them in the blinding glare of plain sight. You and I must remember this simple truth. Sometimes the greatest armor we have is not a concrete bunker, but the sheer courage to step into the light for the people we cherish. The armored vehicle idles at the curb. Anton kills the engine, and 3 enforcers melt into the bustling summer crowd. At a sticky metal table, Lily eats her ice cream with heartbreaking solemnity. She whispers to her stuffed rabbit, telling it to train as a bodyguard. It is a crushing reflection of the violence bleeding into her world. The lens shifts to Damien. The ruthless boss softens, his broad shoulders dropping. He leans forward, weaving a gentle tale about a brave rabbit protecting a giant from a wolf. It is a fragile memory from his mother, buried beneath 30 years of bloodshed. His voice catches slightly in his throat. It leaves us with a quiet truth. No matter how far into the dark you wander, the purest pieces of your soul refuse to die. They simply wait for love to call them back to the surface. From a splintered bench, Savannah watches the terrifying facade of the patriarch wash away. The camera lingers on her face as she sees the fractured man beneath the myth. On the slow drive back, exhaustion takes over, and Lily falls asleep against the leather seat. The heavy silence stretches until Damien finally speaks. Staring out the tinted window, he admits he lost his mother at 8. His father took that raw grief and hammered it into a weapon, forging a killer out of a boy. Savannah reaches out, resting her hand lightly on his arm. She softly suggests that those we lose should guide our hearts, not drag us to the bottom of the river. It brings us to a profound reminder: the people walking around in the thickest, most impenetrable armor are always the ones drowning in the heaviest oceans of unhealed pain. The vehicle glides into the concrete shadows of the underground garage. The heavy steel doors grind shut. Suddenly, Anton raises a flat palm. The air turns to ice. There, pressed into the pristine carpet, is the undeniable dust of a stranger's boot. Damien S. weapon is drawn before his feet even touch the floor, his eyes shifting into cold, lethal instinct. He shields Savannah and the child, sweeping the blind corners of the penthouse with terrifying precision. They find only suffocating emptiness, yet, sitting dead center on the glass table is a cheap plastic phone. The second Damien steps into the room, it screams into a violent ring, echoing off the bare walls. You and I must face a chilling reality here. The concept of a safe haven is just a fragile illusion when the destructive ghosts of your past already hold the keys. The synthetic voice slithers from the speaker with clinical precision. If Damien does not surrender his digital empire, Savannah and the child will be erased. The caller twists the psychological blade, reminding the patriarch that his own violent orbit dragged these innocents into the crosshairs. The line goes dead. Damien stares at the phone, consumed by crushing guilt. Savannah pulls the sleeping child to her chest, bracing for their world to collapse. Meeting Anton's steady gaze, Damien gives a quiet, definitive nod. They must abandon the sanctuary tonight. As they disappear into the freezing winds of the north, we learn a harsh survival lesson when the enemy has entirely rigged the game against you. True victory is found in the sheer courage to flip the board and walk away. The camera pans across the northern sanctuary, a vast timber structure built by Damien's father, heavy with generational shadows. When the tires crunch to a halt, little Lily steps out, mesmerized, to a child suffocated by city concrete. This endless horizon is pure magic. The tension melts off her tiny shoulders as she introduces her stuffed rabbit to the grazing cattle. But the lens cuts sharply upstairs, and the contrast is jarring. In a darkened loft, Savannah is meticulously building a theater of war, running cables and decrypting satellite feeds. The serene quiet of the farm is nothing but a fragile mask. It leaves us to face a sobering truth: the most beautiful, quiet moments of peace in our lives are frequently just the silent intake of breath before a catastrophic storm finally shatters the glass. By midnight, cold paranoia wraps tightly around the farmhouse. Damien quietly summons 6 armed enforcers, disguising their lethal presence as farmhands to protect Lilia's fragile wonder. The deception is a painfully thin veil. Hours later, seated on the creaking timber porch beneath an ocean of stars, the vast isolation finally cracks his iron jaw. Staring into the dark, he whispers that he has not seen a sky like this since his brother Evan was alive. His voice trembles as he explains how Evan's brilliant mind was poisoned by the Syndicate's dark gravity. It is a devastating confession that bleeds into a universal sorrow. We are forced to confront a bitter reality. Sometimes the hardest truth to swallow is that pulling someone close to protect them is the exact move that guarantees their destruction. He projects his deepest failure into the freezing night. Haunted by his brother's ghost, Damien swears that death will never again touch anyone under his roof. Savannah softly reminds him that she and the child are not his property. He bows his head, accepting the boundary, yet his vow remains fiercely unbroken. A heavy silence settles. Noticing her slight shiver, he slides his heavy wool coat from his shoulders and drapes it over hers, a gesture she accepts without a word. Returning to her glowing monitors, Savannah feels the earth shift. This terrifying kingpin is just a scarred man, bleeding from the very same wounds she carries. It reveals a quiet truth. We rarely bond over polished perfection. The deepest human connections are forged in the silent, agonizing scars we hide from the world. In the suffocating hours before dawn, the algorithm finally cracks. Savannah grips her mug, her knuckles turning bone white, paralyzed by the data on the monitor. The camera pushes in on her horrified eyes. The architect of this nightmare is Marcus Vale, the singular mentor who anchored Damien S. Trust. Her trembling fingers cross-reference the digital blood, spatter from the ambush with the private servers. The match is cold and mathematically undeniable. She discovers this betrayal was quietly built, months before she ever stepped into their orbit. She sits frozen in the harsh blue light, drowning in the sickening revelation. It forces us to swallow the most agonizing realization of the human experience. The blade that eventually severs your spine is almost always held by the exact person you warmly invited to sit at your own table. A gray dawn bleeds over the rotting barn, framing the crushing weight of Savannah S. discovery. She holds the undeniable truth proof that the foundation of Damien S. empire is entirely poisoned. She carries the heavy terror of delivering this psychological strike. Yet, as afternoon light spills across the grass, the tension miraculously splinters. Damien unearths a weathered wooden bow, constructing a makeshift target for little Lily. The girl boldly proposes a wager. If her arrow strikes center, the terrifying boss must sit in the dirt and draw with her. Against all probability, Damien actually smiles. It is a breathtaking, defenseless expression of pure joy. It paints a striking paradox of our existence. The most delicate blossoms of humanity frequently choose to flower right on the crumbling edge of our most destructive tempests. Savannah leans against the porch rail, watching the enforcer rediscover his humanity. An ache tightens her chest, the tragic realization that his emotional vault has opened, but time is running out. In this violent orbit, tranquility is a cruel illusion. Deep into the pitch-black night, a silent alarm fractures the peace. A surveillance drone glides through the heavy pines like a mechanical specter. With cold precision, Anton steps from the shadows, neutralizing the machine with an electromagnetic pulse. The drone plummets into the frost, yet its fractured lens flickers, actively transmitting their exact coordinates. Damien stares down at the shattered technology, his jaw tight, knowing the sanctuary has fallen. It hammers home an inescapable truth. No matter how deeply you bury yourself, your unhealed past will always calculate the perfect trajectory to hunt you down. Let us pause and unpack this devastating scene together. The camera pushes in tight on Savannah as she locks eyes with Damien. You can practically feel the oxygen drain from the room. She is not simply delivering bad news. She is systematically dismantling his reality. The pale morning sun cuts harshly through the blinds, casting long shadows across his face as she drops the encrypted drives onto his desk. We are looking at raw, undeniable video files proving that Marcus Vale, his closest confidant, sold them out. She delivers this nightmare with the cold precision of a trauma surgeon cutting out a tumor. It is brutal to witness, but here's the profound truth about betrayal that you and I must face. If you do not expose the rot immediately and with blinding honesty, the infection will eventually consume you. You must stare the ugly truth in the eyes, no matter how much it burns. Let us watch this frame closely, you and I. The bruised light of dawn bleeds across the dusty floorboards. Savannah remains perfectly still by the cracked glass. When Damien finally breaks the silence, his voice is a wet rasp, like crushed gravel beneath a heavy boot. For 3 years, he broke bread with Marcus at Sunday dinners. Marcus buried the bloody truth of his brother's death. The camera pushes in on Savannah's eyes. Marcus took Damien's sacred grief and turned it into a weapon. A pen snaps in Damien's trembling fist, ink spilling like bad blood. He wants to end Marcus tonight, but Savannah blocks the door. It reminds us of a hard truth. True power is never the wild swing of a reckless fist, but the agonizing discipline of holding your ground when everything inside you screams to fight. We know how deeply revenge burns, begging to consume everything. But the camera lingers on Savannah, playing a far more tragic, elegant game. If Damien charges out, the syndicate will swallow him whole. Instead, she demands the unthinkable. Play dead. Let the man who raised you believe his knife hit the mark. She even offers herself and little Lily as the bleeding bait. Damien freezes, the muscles in his jaw ticking. Every instinct screams at him to tear Marcus apart. Yet, he swallows the poison. For the next 18 hours, Savannah sits by a radio, feeding false coordinates to a rotting grain silo 20 miles away. It is brilliant misdirection. When anger demands an explosion, the wisest choice is always to choke down the smoke, take a breath, and build a quiet, inescapable trap. Picture the crushing weight of the silence in that abandoned silo. It is an empty, rusting tomb. The lens pans across the rafters, where Damien has hidden 12 enforcers in the suffocating shadows before dusk. When the morning sun breaks, Victor arrives with a heavy 6-man squad. But here is the devastating twist in our tragedy. Marcus is nowhere to be found. The trap springs, and blood spills in exactly 90 seconds. 2 men fall dead. 4 drop their weapons. Victor takes a brutal round to his thigh. Damien drags the bleeding man into a dark corner, while Savannah listens to the echoes miles away. 2 hours later, Victor breaks. It teaches us a brutal rule of survival. Never step blindly into a perfectly quiet room without expecting the shadows to bite back. Victor folds like cheap paper under the pressure, terrified of the blade. He sells out the safe house and spills the twisted intelligence Marcus gave him. Then he delivers a blow that shatters their moral universe. Why did Marcus skip the ambush? He was hunting down little Lily. The man who once tucked Damien into bed is now using a chestnut as currency for the syndicate. Stick with me here, because this is the absolute pinnacle of human betrayal. The moment Anton radios the true truth, Damien calls Savannah, his voice thick with panic. Marcus is driving straight to the farm. The frame cuts to Savannah in the dusty barn, her hand wrapped tightly around Lily's fingers. It is a bitter pill to swallow, but sometimes the hands you trust the absolute most are the ones holding the knife. The camera stays close on Savannah's face as she absorbs the warning. Her breathing is remarkably steady. Outside, guards lock down the perimeter, but tragedy is already breathing down their necks. Marcus is inside. Decades ago, Damien's father showed Marcus a hidden trail through the woods, a blind spot forgotten by everyone else. The past has literally come to slit their throats. At 4:26 in the morning, the power lines are cut. The farm is swallowed by an ocean of blackness, and the security feeds die. Savannah does not even blink. Her primal instinct takes the wheel before her mind registers the dark. Our unaddressed past will always find its way home to collect its debts. We must forge the inner strength to keep our eyes open when the lights finally go out. In the suffocating dark, Savannah pushes Lily into the prickly hay. She draws her weapon, crouching like a cornered animal. Heavy boots make the old floorboards bleed with a groan. Marcus whispers from the void. Savannah's voice shakes as she demands the truth about Evan's murder. The silence stretches tight as wire, until Marcus coldly admits he ordered the hit. Curled in the dirt, Lily lets out a tiny sob. Marcus snaps his gun toward the noise. Savannah fires blindly into the black, missing entirely. Marcus shoots back. The muzzle flash illuminates the barn as a bullet rips across Savannah's arm. This violent poetry reveals a simple law of humanity. When the world descends into absolute chaos, your only real job is to stand between the innocent and the raging fire. The brutal impact throws Savannah into the dirt. Crosses the room. He snatches Lily and presses cold steel to the child's temple. You and I can agree. There is no deeper horror than watching corruption hold innocence at gunpoint. A deafening crack shatters the barn. Marcus goes entirely rigid. A dark void blossoms between his eyes before his body slumps into the dust. Up in the hayloft, Anton lowers a smoking rifle. Savannah scrambles on her knees, dragging Lily fiercely against her bleeding chest. The child finally shatters, weeping into her shoulder. When Damien's truck tears into the yard an hour later, The tragedy whispers its lesson. True heroes do not seek applause. They simply arrive in the exact second you need them to save your life. The camera tracks Damien as he tears across the dark yard, throwing himself through the barn doors. He finds Savannah collapsed in the straw, her teeth clamped around torn fabric to tie off her bleeding arm. It is a haunting portrait of survival. Little Lily is curled into a tight ball on her lap. Damien falls straight to his knees in the bloody dust. He asks no questions. He just wraps his heavy arms around both of them, burying his face into their shoulders. Watch his trembling hands. It is the very first time this violently broken man has truly held anyone since his brother died. Lily weeps softly into his collar, calling him Mr. Cross. It is a beautifully tragic reminder that even the most damaged souls inevitably need a safe harbor when the sky finally falls on them. We have watched the agonizing cycle of violence break these people, but the silent aftermath is where the deepest scars form. The camera holds on Lily as she whispers that a hug makes her feel better. Damien's voice fractures as he agrees. Savannah stares blankly at the wooden rafters, just to stop her tears from falling. Outside, Antlan wipes down the scene with the cold efficiency of a man who makes corpses disappear. Hours later, the child is asleep. Damien and Savannah sit frozen beside a stone fireplace. The adrenaline drains away, leaving only heavy, suffocating grief. No matter how many brutal victories you claim in the dark, the empty spaces after the gunfire are always the heaviest burden. We must actively search for a sliver of grace within those fragile, broken moments. Let us examine this pivotal shift together. The dying embers paint their exhausted faces in ash. Savannah warns Damien he cannot control the universe, demanding they never repeat the bloody chaos of tonight. Damien nods, staring into the flame. He unveils the cold arithmetic of their tragedy. Marcus is dead. Blackwood, the syndicate king, is now blind. Without intelligence, Blackwood will unleash an animalistic street war. Damien refuses to wait for the slaughter. His posture shifts into something terrifyingly corporate. He will not shoot Blackwood. He will sever his financial throat. Money is the only real battlefield. This stark pivot offers a pragmatic lesson. If you want to destroy an absolute giant, you never swing at his jaw. You calmly sweep his legs out from under him. Damien steps into the frame, voice laced with dread, ordering her to stay off the front lines. Savannah stares a hole right through him, rejecting his fear. She demands he stop treating her like a fragile liability and start revering her as the architect of his survival. The silence between them is thick, almost electric, until Damien finally yields. Savannah takes total control of the narrative. Her vision is infinitely colder than his. They will not play in the gutter. Instead, she will weave Marcus's confession and Victor's cowardice into an apocalyptic ghost file. She will drop the poison directly onto the desks of her old federal contacts. It is a stunning realization of a core truth. A dangerous partnership only survives when both partners are brave enough to let the other lead the charge into the dark. The camera pulls back to reveal the breathtaking scale of her revenge. We have seen vengeance before, you and I, but Savannah elevates it to high art. Federal agents kick down Blackwood's doors, blind to the hands moving their strings. The Cross family remains a phantom. For 60 hours, Savannah dances through Blackwood's financial arteries like a plague. When she cuts the cord, 60% of his empire bleeds out, scattering millions into charities, like salt over scorched earth. Damien watches her, terrified by the sheer violence of her mercy. When he asks if she is truly walking away with nothing, she looks up, utterly empty of greed. The lesson echoes endlessly. True power is not the ability to hoard a vast empire, but the absolute freedom to leave it burning to ash in your rearview mirror. The camera pushes in on Savannah. She tells Damien that to shatter a syndicate, you must starve it. Strip a crime lord of his capital, and you destroy the invisible currency of the underworld, the blind loyalty of violent men. Damien smiles, a rare break in his armor. He calls her the absolute salvation of his lineage, but she simply murmurs that she is the ruin of Blackwood. Right then, little Lily drifts into the dim corridor. clutching a stuffed rabbit to ward off nightmares. Damien lifts her effortlessly, swearing the house is entirely clean of monsters. It is a striking visual and a vital truth to carry. You can become the ultimate terror of the wicked, but you must always leave a quiet, warm room in your soul to protect the innocent from the dark. Lily buries her face against his collar, needing a whispered promise of safety. Watching them in the flickering firelight, Savannah crosses a psychological threshold. She stops running from the bleeding shadows of this world and decides to command them. We rarely choose the trauma that fractures our lives, but we have absolute power over who we stand beside when the long night falls. For 3 days, a heavy silence descends upon the manor. Savannah navigates the digital abyss for 14 hours a day. Damien only appears to slide a steaming bowl of soup beside her keyboard. He never interrupts her focus, simply anchoring her to the physical room. The deepest form of love is often quietly ensuring someone survives, while they tear down a corrupt empire. Let's look at the geography of corruption together. Savannah sinks into the black ocean of syndicate finances, pulling apart the rotting threads of the empire. She uncovers phantom banks in Malta, ghost ledgers in Cyprus, and shell corporations laundering blood money in Panama. Her terrifying genius lies in her restraint. For 60 agonizing hours, she alters absolutely nothing. She sits in the glow of the monitors, measuring the respiration of their security network, timing her invisible blade to slip between the beats of their digital heart. This masterful display of discipline reveals a fundamental truth. The most tectonic shifts in our lives usually occur in absolute silence, long before the world realizes the ground has moved. This quiet violence is where the story becomes truly fascinating. If the technicians sense even a slight tremor, the fortress will seal shut. Operating entirely in the blind spots, she constructs a 340-page monument of sheer destruction. She connects 2 years of bloody footprints to a compromised relay in Indiana and embeds Victor's visual confession with unassailable time codes. She charts their hidden smuggling veins and the ghosts of 6 unsolved murders. Through this storm of data, Damien remains anchored in the shadowed corner, witnessing her unravel a dynasty. It is a powerful reminder. Having a partner who silently guards your space while you step into your absolute power is the most profound foundation you can ever build in this life. Approaching midnight. On the second, Damien names the heavy truth hanging in the room. She is a weapon sharper than any steel in his vault. Her gaze never leaves the glowing monitors. By the dawn of the 3rd day, the physical toll is undeniable. Deep shadows anchor her exhausted eyes. Damien quietly approaches, offering a warm ceramic mug. When she questions the intrusion, he murmurs that it is just coffee, but it is entirely black, carrying exactly 1 drop of cream. It is the precise armor she requires when she refuses to admit she is breaking. True intimacy is rarely found in grand declarations. It lives in the dedication of studying a person so thoroughly that you know exactly how to hold them together when their world becomes far too heavy. The gesture pierces her defenses. Her voice tightens as she realizes how closely he watches her. Damien offers a steady confession, stating that every detail of her existence commands his attention. There is no theatrical romance in this frame. She simply anchors her tired hand to his calloused one, absorbing his quiet vow that the storm will break. When Friday arrives, the snare is drawn tight. At exactly 3 o'clock, she strikes the return key. In 47 seconds, $312 million of poisoned capital evaporates, bleeding silently into 180 phantom accounts. It is a brilliant demonstration of a universal law. When you architect your strategy with enough patience, you can completely hollow out a giant without ever striking a single physical blow. Notice the brutal symmetry of this collapse. In a fraction of a second, Blackwood's financial architecture is overridden, with necrotic data that will shatter upon inspection. In Milwaukee, Silas Blackwood stares into the abyss as his empire flatlines. He violently destroys his office, screaming for his shadow brokers, but the lines are dead. The phantoms have claimed his kingdom. Just at that Senate, Savannah materializes on the desks of 3 federal agents and 2 hungry Chicago journalists. The board is completely swept clean. It is a harsh but necessary law of the universe. The higher you elevate a monument constructed entirely out of deception and cruelty, the more devastating the impact will be when gravity finally demands its due. You and I both know the authorities will never uncover the ghost who handed them the keys to this seat. At 4:11 the following morning, tactical units shatter the doors of 6 Blackwood strongholds. Silas is dragged from his luxurious sanctuary in cold steel, trembling as his reality collapses. The true poetry of the moment. Not a single thread leads back to the Cross lineage. Hours later, in the soft morning light of their kitchen, Damien studies the breaking news. He turns to Savannah and states that she dismantled an 8-year dynasty without chambering a single round. She takes a quiet sip of her coffee, perfectly undisturbed. It reminds us that intellect will forever outclass brute force. The most catastrophic weapon you can ever forge is a patient, calculating mind. 2 weeks pass, and the Blackwood organization is entirely extinguished. Silas rots in a cell without bail, his loyalists having traded their honor for lighter sentences in days. The Cross Syndicate absorbs the vacuum smoothly, ascending to an untouchable status. But Damien refuses to celebrate the bloodshed. Instead, he uses the shadow to simply fade away. They retreat to the biting winds of Chicago, abandoning their former life. Damien mandates that his crew strip the old apartment down to the floorboards, systematically erasing the ghost of Savannah's perfume and the heavy tragedy of her sister. It is a severe but necessary cleansing. Before you can construct the architecture of a hopeful future, you must be willing to incinerate the museums where you hoard your old grief. We often forget that surviving the inferno is merely the prologue. Learning to breathe in the quiet aftermath is the actual trial. They acquire a 3-story brick sanctuary in Lincoln Park. While obscured by corporate shells, Savannah alone holds the deed. Standing in the foyer, Damien places a solitary brass key into her palm, declaring that this is her sanctuary, not his. When she asks about his key, he replies that she can offer him one whenever she feels safe enough. Outside, a covert security team blends perfectly into the neighborhood. It is a profound demonstration of devotion. True love does not forcefully conquer the territory of another person's fractured soul. It gently places the keys in their hand and patiently waits on the threshold for an invitation to enter. Observe how true restoration operates in the quiet details. Young Lily commands the playground by week 1, yet she still teaches classmates to sweep for microphones. The paranoia of the underworld dies a slow death. Meanwhile, Savannah claims the daylight, launching Road Cyber Solutions as a legitimate enterprise, with Damien acting as a silent shadow. Enter Eli Park, her first recruit. He arrives drenched in anxious sweat, stammering an apology for executing a corrupt mandate at his last firm. Savannah instantly severs that narrative. She reminds him that he voiced the truth, and his superiors simply chose blindness. It is a vital doctrine to carry forward. You must completely refuse to bear the crushing psychological weight of another person's absolute moral failure. Let's unpack this together. We see Savannah anchor her gaze on Eli, dismantling the heavy chains of obligation with a single truth. She tells him he owes her nothing. His stellar work is currency enough. It is a beautiful lesson that true loyalty is never born from guilt, but watered by mutual respect. Meanwhile, Damien is actively torching the toxic foundations of the Cross Syndicate. He systematically uproots the suburban enforcers and scatters the blood-stained cash couriers responsible for last year's tragedies. He funnels a criminal river into legitimate casinos and hotels. Most profoundly, he severs ties with his own violent relatives. The lesson here is timeless and absolute. To build a stable future, you sometimes have to strike a match and burn the rotting wood of your past. The camera pans down to damp streets. Damien is no saint, and Savannah demands no flawless hero, only a man willing to bleed for his own evolution. The harsh autumn wind bites at his dark coat as he nears her townhouse, clutching a folded index card, Lily left on his windshield. Inside the amber-lit room, the little girl arranges plates for a stuffed bear, directing the room like a mob boss. When the heavy door groans open, Damien stands in the cold, holding a polished recurve bow. The tragic irony is blinding. The same scarred hands that once assembled his father's sniper rifles have whittled this toy of innocent focus. It teaches us a quiet truth. A genuine, agonizing effort to change is the absolute highest form of love you can ever give to someone. The camera pulls in. Lily stares at the smooth wood, her tiny fingers tracing her carved name. She pulls the bow tight to her chest, her disbelieving eyes finding his hardened face. She whispers that he actually remembered. Damien crouches, the harsh lines of his jaw softening in the dim light. His gravelly voice rumbles, swearing that a promise is a promise. Later, washed in the golden glow of the street lamps, he and Savannah stand on the balcony. The night air hangs thick like smoke. He forces the question out, asking if she regrets the fatal contract that bound them. She smiles, regretting only a long nap at her desk, never him. We learn here that fully owning our darkest choices is the only true way to escape the suffocating prison of regret. Notice the complete absence of sound in this frame. She looks at him with terrifying clarity, her eyes catching the streetlight, whispering that he is the furthest thing from a regret. Slowly, Damien drags his badly scarred hand across the freezing metal table, resting it over her delicate fingers. There are no swelling strings, no dramatic confessions of love. It is a fragile, bleeding truce that neither soul dares to shatter. The deepest human connections often scream the loudest in absolute silence. They need no flashy labels to prove their weight. 3 quiet months pass in Chicago, but Savannah knows the rhythm of tragedy. The Bureau taught her that peace is merely the breath before the scream. The illusion dies on a gray Thursday, when a nameless, encrypted warning flashes violently across a private monitor. You and I are watching a tragedy tighten its noose. The blue light of the monitor washes over Savannah's pale face as a bone-deep cold paralyzes her. The text is a ghost from the past. Silas left one final, bloody order before his cell door slammed shut. Watch the photographer. She forwards the message to Damien without a single typed word, because true desperation needs no translation. The camera cuts to Damien. The lover vanishes, replaced instantly by a cold-blooded apex predator. He unleashes his ruthless hunters into the concrete labyrinth. In 3 days, they drag a phantom into the light. Ronan Fitzgerald, a ghost hiding behind the flawless mask of a freelance photographer. It is a terrifying reminder. Our darkest, most lethal threats do not wear monster masks. They hide behind perfectly ordinary smiles. The bullet was never meant for Damien. Silas understood the pitch-black architecture of vengeance. To completely break a powerful man, you never strike his flesh. You slaughter his heart by taking the woman he loves, leaving a bleeding crater that outlasts any physical scar. The dossier reveals weeks of photos. Savannah, drinking coffee. Little Lily walking to school. The camera captures Damien physically vibrating with a murderous rage, swearing to erase the threat himself. But Savannah steps directly into his violent storm, anchoring his trembling hands to his promise of a bloodless path. She stares down his feral panic with eyes of pure ices, taking control. True unbreakable strength lies in holding fast to your moral compass when blind terror threatens to shatter it completely. She demands exactly 72 hours to execute her play. You and I can almost feel the psychological agony tearing through Damien's chest. This restraint goes against every feral instinct he has ever known. Yet, his rigid shoulders drop. He yields, demanding only an invisible fortress of security around her and the child. The scene shifts to a masterful game of chess. Savannah paints a fragile illusion, creating a rigid routine at a glass-fronted cafe. Same coat, same table, the exact same hour. The assassin watches from the shadows, selecting the third morning to strike. But the genius of her trap lies in the decoy. The woman sipping espresso is an old bureau operative, waiting to snap the jaws shut. Patient, Ice-cold strategy will forever outsmart impulsive brute force. The camera lingers on Maya, draped in the exact same trench coat. The theater of it all is intoxicating. The assassin is so blinded by his prey that he completely misses the hard-eyed federal agents pouring his black coffee. For 30 agonizing minutes, the tension stretches like a piano wire. Fitzgerald slides into the booth. We see the slow, lethal shift of his shoulder as he reaches for his weapon. Before the metal clears his jacket, the snare violently snaps shut. Agents crash into the table, ripping his bag open to spill a damning river of surveillance photos across the floor. An ironclad conspiracy charge, secured without a single drop of blood. It proves that monsters only hold power in the shadows. Drag them into the glaring light of consequence, and they shatter. Terrified of a cage, the assassin sings, trading a cash courier, a dirty clinic, and 3 heavy rivals to save his skin. In mere days, a federal wave washes the syndicate from the streets. Cut to the heavy shadows of Damien's office. His enforcer points out the sheer, poetic irony. Savannah ripped a criminal empire down to the studs in 3 days. Their violent crew bled for a decade trying to achieve that, and she did it without firing a single bullet. Damien stands by the glass, staring at the bruised, purple Chicago skyline. His breath hitches as a profound realization settles in his chest. He whispers that her terrifying brilliance is exactly why he loves her. Ultimate power is never found in destruction. It is the quiet wisdom to win the war without ever throwing a punch. Notice the gravity of this moment. A man forged in blood and steel is letting the word love slip past his lips for the very first time. His enforcer just nods, bowing to the beauty of it all. Consumed by this revelation, Damien buys out an entire shop of yellow tulips, simply because Savannah mentioned them in passing weeks ago. It reveals our core truth. Genuine love is never found in theatrical declarations. It breathes in the quiet act of paying attention. When Savannah opens her door, she is swallowed by a vibrant sea of yellow petals, contrasting violently with his dark suit. Damien stands there, a terrifying man, his voice physically trembling under the crushing weight of his unguarded heart. She smiles softly, stepping back to invite him and all his fragile vulnerability inside. The lens shifts to little Lily, among her crayons. She looks up, moving her gaze from the bright flowers to the sheer terror sweating on the brow of a crime boss. With intuitive grace, the child gathers her toys and vanishes upstairs. Left alone, this lethal man is violently stripped of his armor. His massive hands shake as he stammers, confessing he has no blueprint for this overwhelming emotion. Savannah steps close, her touch silencing the frantic spiral of his mind. She whispers for him to stop rehearsing, to just let it exist. He exhales a ragged breath, admitting he never understood love before she collided with his life. He asks for nothing in return, dropping every weapon you hold to hand someone. Your bare, beating heart is the single bravest act a human being can perform. Savannah's voice finally fractures the heavy silence. She confesses she has loved him too, since the first spark of their chaotic collision. The camera pulls back as winter melts, breathing life into the Chicago streets. What makes this resolution so hauntingly beautiful is their refusal to rush. Damien rules his dark world, she commands the light, yet their edges bleed naturally together. A drawer is surrendered to his dark shirts. A mug bears his name in Lily's handwriting. In a monumental shift, the child finally drops the formal titles. It is a profound lesson. Deep healing cannot be chained to a ticking clock. The most indestructible bonds are those we allow to grow slowly, honoring every fragile step until the foundation is strong enough to hold up the world. Walk into this final frame with me. The contrast is enough to break your heart. The terrifying phantom of the underworld has vanished. In his place sits Uncle Damien, now holding the absurd title of second assistant to a stuffed bear. The kitchen is a bright war zone of white flour hanging in the sunlight like snow. Lily commands the counter, demanding a trip to the zoo to ride a llama. Savannah shakes her head, but Lily insists her uncle promised. Damien throws his head back, a genuine laugh vibrating in his chest, clarifying he promised a photograph, not a rodeo. The camera fades out on this beautiful truth. No matter how far into the violent shadows you have wandered, you can always find your way back to the warm, unfiltered light of joy. The camera lingers on Lily, parsing a bedtime compromise like a tiny courtroom lawyer. Savannah leans against the doorframe, teasing that the former crime boss is finally learning to negotiate. Damien's dark eyes soften, crediting his brilliant teacher, but the agonizing labor happens in the dark. He is dragging his violent syndicate into the daylight, pushing 78% of their revenue into clean casinos. Yet, his heaviest burden is personal atonement. In the dead of night, his hands tremble as he authorizes anonymous trust funds for the widows of 3 men slaughtered in his old territory wars. You can never wash the blood entirely from your past, but you always hold the terrifying power to pick up the pen and draft a radically different ending. Damien knows better than to claim any moral high ground. The man carries far too many ghosts for that kind of title, but he has violently shed the skin of a ruthless kingpin, and Savannah witnesses the grueling labor of his daily transformation. She does not demand a spotless history, only a brutally honest present. Meanwhile, her own fractured world is blooming. Her cybersecurity firm operates in lucrative shadows, and she commands respect in a university lecture hall. The ashes of their past have finally settled. She sits in a sun-drenched cafe, savoring the rare taste of peace. Suddenly, the wooden table rattles. An unlisted number glows like a warning beacon on her phone screen. Life has a cruel habit of throwing a massive curveball exactly when you stop bracing for the impact. Let us put the film right here, you and I, because this specific frame changes everything. The cold voice on the line belongs to a federal agent. The digital shadows of her reckless hacking days have finally cornered her. But here is the agonizingly brilliant twist. They do not want her wrists in iron cuffs. Instead of a concrete cell, they are offering her a highly classified consulting badge. Savannah sits perfectly still, her breath catching in her throat, as she watches the blurred city move beyond the cafe glass. She calmly asks for time to think, recognizing the heavy weight of this olive branch. True strength is never about hiding in the dark until you disappear. It is about deciding exactly how and exactly when you command the courage to step out under the blinding lights. Savannah steps onto the freezing balcony that night to drop the crushing news. The government wants her on their payroll. Damien does not flinch or pull away. He simply studies the trembling tension in her jaw, searching for what she truly wants. She is trapped in a void between pure terror and undeniable thrill. Without hesitation, Damien reaches through the bitter cold and takes her hand, anchoring her with a solemn vow to stand by her choice. Just inside the glass doors, Lily sleeps bathed in warm light, untouched by the brutal stakes her parents carry. This quiet, devastating scene holds a vital truth. Rushing to judge someone shatter years of fragile trust. Sometimes the most powerful thing one human can do is simply show up, stand in the cold, and truly listen. The camera pulls back, fading to black. It takes unimaginable courage to swallow your pride and start over. This tragic story is a heavy study in second chances. It is a bleeding tribute to the unsung heroes who hold our fractured lives together, without asking for applause. We see proof here that biology does not dictate a parent. Your real family is built from the fiercely loyal souls who act as a human shield between you and utter ruin. The takeaway is impossible to ignore. Hold fiercely to those who refuse to leave when the hurricane hits. If you felt the weight of this story, please leave a like. Share this with a friend who needs to know redemption is possible. And subscribe. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt entirely unseen by your own inner circle? Let us talk about it.
The relationship between Damien and Savannah teaches an important lesson about protection and boundaries. Damien's instinct is to protect through control. After nearly losing Savannah and Lily, he wants to keep them close, secure them, and remove threats before they reach them. In his world, that makes sense. He has survived by acting quickly and decisively. But Savannah refuses to become someone who is simply guarded, managed, or hidden. She sets clear conditions. Lily must never learn the full truth of the criminal world. No violence must happen in front of them, and Savannah was free to leave with no surveillance or consequences. These boundaries are crucial because they protect her dignity. This teaches viewers that true protection does not erase agency. A person can need safety and still deserve choice. A person can accept help and still set terms. Damien's growth is shown by the fact that he does not negotiate her boundaries, he signs them. Later, when danger rises again, Savannah challenges him to treating her as someone and to treat her as a partner. This is one of the story's most meaningful educational points. Healthy care does not mean making every decision for someone else. It means giving them the information, tools, and respect needed to stand beside you. Savannah protects Lily, but she also teaches Lily awareness rather than fear. She gives the child tools to changes in the world while still trying to preserve innocence. Damien must learn the same balance. Protect without possessing, help without controlling, love without turning another person into property. The lesson is clear. Real safety includes freedom. If protection becomes a cage, then it has failed at its deepest purpose.